Hey guys, Dan here. Welcome to this video. Today we're going to try out the new AMD 6800 XT. It wasn't easy to get the RTX card, it was harder to get the 5950X, but holy shit, this AMD 6800 XT, I had trouble getting one, but I managed to get one and put it through the benchmark, iRacing and ACC. The card I got is directly from AMD. Very nice build quality, seems much nicer than the RTX cards I have here. And I overclocked the card to 2750 MHz on the GPU clock, and I gave a little boost of 200 MHz to the memory clock. We're going to compare the card to both my 3080 and 3090. I didn't manually overclock those, so whatever the manufacturer chose on the overclock, this is where the cards are running at. The benchmark system is just my regular gaming PC, AMD Ryzen 5950X. It's slightly overclocked, it boosts up to 5.2 GHz and 32 GB of RAM running at 3800 MHz and 1535 timings. SAM, Smart Access Memory for the Radeon card has been enabled. Before we get into the benchmarks, I'm streaming on Twitch every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, link in the description below. Would love to see you there. And if you have any questions regarding streaming, sim racing, tech, whatever, we have a very nice community Discord, link in the description below. Feel free to join that. But let's get to the benchmarks. We are going to start with iRacing, a quali lab, so it's not very CPU limited here in this case. And if we look at the results, the 6800 XT and the 3080 are actually fairly close. It's like 8 frames per second difference in the average frame rate, with the 3090 about 30 frames ahead. Same result basically on 1440p. Again, the quali lab, 6800 XT and the 3080 are fairly close to each other, and I mean the 3080 is like more than twice the price, so kind of an unfair comparison, but it's slightly faster. But since most of the time we don't really have this scenario, I also made a benchmark at the start. So this is a Porsche Cup race, standing start at Suzuka. But apart from the average frame rate being lower, it's basically the same picture, with the 6800 and the 3080 being fairly close to each other and the 3090 slightly faster. And for whatever reason, when we go to 1440p single screen, the 6800 is actually nearly on par with the 3090, beating the 3080. I don't know why. It barely loses any performance when going from 1080 to 1440p single screen. I redid the benchmark quite a few times and could always reproduce it, but that's also just iRacing. Sometimes the iRacing benchmarks just don't really make any sense. I guess if I manually overclock the 3080 to the maximum, it would overtake the 6800 XT, but yeah, I didn't do that for these benchmarks. They are all very, very playable. I mean, look at the frame rate, 174 for the slowest card on average. That's more than fine. Alright, let's move over to the triple screen benchmarks. Same scenario, Porsche Cup start. And this is where it gets interesting because nvidia has some very, very nice features to improve the performance on a triple screen setup. The feature is called SMP, that stands for Simultaneous Multi-Projection, and it's basically a feature that replaces the geometry across multiple viewports. So if you have a triple screen setup, then each monitor will show a slightly different angle of the game, and that means every monitor called a viewport also has a slightly different geometry of the track. And so with 3 screens, the geometry would have to be calculated 3 times. But when you enable this SMP feature on nvidia card, this only has to be calculated a single time. And the benefits of that, I will show them to you in the benchmarks. When we look at the results without the SMP feature, you can see the 6800 XT is about 30 frames per second on average slower than the 3080. And the 3080, interestingly, being a little bit faster than the 3090. But like I said, iRacing benchmarks, it's a bit weird sometimes, so yeah. But when we now enable the SMP feature on iRacing, you can just check that in the graphics options. Then the gap to the RTX cards gets even bigger, with the 3080 being at 195 frames per second on average and the 3090 being at 200 8 approximately. That is like 40 to 50 frames per second more on the RTX cards compared to the 6800 XT. And when we move to the 1440p triple setup, it's basically the same picture. The gap gets even bigger in percentages, with the 6800 XT being at about 90 frames per second on average, and the 3080 with SMP enabled being at 120, 30 frames per second higher. Keep in mind, those cards are about the same price. I mean, you can really buy either of them, but in theory the 3080 might be the better buy here in this case. Alright, moving on to ACC, Assetto Corsa Competizione. I chose a very difficult scenario for the benchmark. We were replaying a start at Spa in the rain. The graphic preset is on Epic with the volumetric fog disabled though. Interestingly, 1080p and 1440p basically gave me nearly exactly the same result on a single screen setup. So we'll just look at 1440p. And here we actually have a similar result as on iRacing, with the 6800 XT being slightly slower than the RTX cards, but not by a lot. And also if you look at the 1% low and 0.1% low, it's fairly comparable. Going to the triple screen benchmarks, the gap between the cards gets bigger. The game definitely struggles with triple screen setups, so this is always a nice benchmark for modern cards. The 6800 XT tops out at 77.7 average frames per second here, with the 3080 being at 86.3 and the 3090 at 90.2. And when we go to 1440p triples, the gap becomes bigger. And this is also something that I saw on other reviews of the AMD cards. The higher the resolution, the bigger the gap to the RTX cards. So on the 1440p triple benchmark here, we see the 6800 at about 50 frames per second, the 3080 at about 60, and the 3090 at about 68. And this is 50 frames per second on average. This is a frame rate where it kind of starts to feel very choppy. I have no idea how people actually can play this game on consoles with an average frame rate of 30 frames per second, but that's a different topic. So to wrap this up, if you're on a single screen, I think you can get either of these cards. I mean, don't get a 3090 for a single screen setup. Actually, I would not recommend the 3090 at all. It's just the price performance. Just no, don't get it. But yeah, if you like maybe an ultra wide at 1080p, you shouldn't see a big difference between the 6800 XT and the 3080, but keep in mind they are fairly similar priced, so if you can actually get a 3080 or a 6800 XT at a similar price, I would choose the 3080. If you're on a triple screen setup, I think it's just not really a question which card to get. With the RTX cards, with the SMP enabled, is just fairly superior to the AMD cards. And this is also one thing where nvidia is really nice with all the features. They have a part of the raw performance, like SMP for example, or something that I would love to see in simracing is DLSS, deep learning super sampling. For example, on a triple screen setup, I mean, you don't really need the full resolution on the side screens. You barely see them. It's just for peripheral vision. And having them run at like 480p with DLSS enabled, that would be a nice boost in performance, I think. And I don't think you would notice a big difference, especially in ACC. I mean, it uses the Unreal Engine. As far as I know, there are titles with the Unreal Engine that use DLSS. Would be cool to have. Unfortunately, I don't really have a 3070 here. I would love to test that as well, but yeah, I can't really afford to buy all the graphics cards. So, but my assumption would be that even the 3070 would probably beat the AMD card for sim racing, especially at a triple screen setup. But that's just my guess. Unfortunately, no card here, so take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to join the Discord. And if you liked the video, click on the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, would be appreciated, and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.